If you can say your name and spell it for me so I don't do it wrong.
My name is Tom Marquette, Marquette.
Okay.
Linda Walker, LindAWalker.
And I am Karen Grant, Grant, and I am a board of director with the Linn County Pioneer Association.
I have 8 generations buried in that cemetery.
Wow.
Goodness, 8 generations.
So you said the picture is where? Where were you in that picture?
Providence Cemetery on Richardson's Gap Road out of Scioto.
Oh.
So the
Okay.
Providence Church, Providence, they're called Vineyard Christian Fellowship now, but that was originally a pioneer church called Providence Baptist Missionary Church.
Okay.
And it's the longest continuous operating church in the state of Oregon.
Oh,
Awesome. And you said you had 8 generations of family in that
In
cemetery?
that cemetery, yes.
Wow.
I have my own spot reserved and paid for next to my dad.
In that same cemetery?
Same, yeah. We go back, my 3 great-grandparents would be within 30 feet of where I will be buried.
Wow.
And I go back one more generation than that, being 7th generation Linn County. My 4 great-grandfather is buried within a mile of that cemetery in a private little cemetery that's the Gaines family cemetery, which was used up until the time they opened the Providence Cemetery.
so what year are we talking?
Well,
18.
Go ahead.
1856.
Okay.
It's debatable which day the church, or which year the church opened and which year the cemetery opened.
The
Okay.
cemetery records said the church was founded in April of 1853, and then the cemetery land got donated in 56 for grandkids of Joab Powell, who died in an epidemic. I don't know what kind.
So you come out of the Powells?
I am related to the Powells. I'm not a descendant of Joab Powell. I'm a descendant of his sister, Jane Powell Beeler. Yeah, they married back and forth. Joab Powell married Anna Beeler, and Jane Powell married John Beeler, I think. Anyway, that Martha Beeler
Kept
was
the
married
family there.
Yes.
Cornwall Thackeray Lever, and that is my great-great-grandfather and grandmother.
So did they come across on the Oregon Trail, or how did they get out?
Yeah, they all came across in covered wagons. Joab Powell was the most well-known circuit riding preacher in the Oregon country
Right,
before it was even a territory,
right.
and in the territory and in the state.
Remind me, which route did they didn't come, did they use the Barlow?
I don't know about Joab Powell's route. I
No,
know
your family.
My 2 branches of my family that I do know about came down. The Sheltons came in 1847. They were the first wagon train to come the full Barlow Trail or Barlow Road around the south side of Mount Hood. Prior to that, everyone went down the Columbia on rafts and drove their stock down trails on the side of the river, but it wasn't enough to bring covered wagons.
So they
They could
floated the wagons?
They
Yeah.
tore the wheels off the
Yeah.
wagons, floated them on rafts down the Columbia prior to 1846. 1846 was when the Barlow Trail opened up, which also was the same year that the Applegate Trail opened up, which is called the Southern Route into Oregon. It splits off of the Oregon Trail at Farewell Bend in what is now Idaho, and comes up basically the same route as I-5, the same path that was the easiest path for the animals to follow, the Indians followed, the pioneers followed, and then they built roads. The center of this valley was all marshy, and the area where I-5 is was not developed until up in the 1950s, after the farmers had put in drain tiles and drained all the fields out. Prior to that, you had 99 East and 99 West going down the sides of the valley, which was dry land, and that's where the older towns are, including this one, going down the sides of the valley.
Very cool. And then, do you know how to spell some of those names you gave us?
Which one?
Any of them?
Your family names?
So you said there were two branches of your family.
Right,
So what were the two family names?
My three great-grandfather that came in 1847 was Haman, Haman, Shelton, Shelton,
Okay.
and his wife Priscilla, I won't try to spell that, Fitzgerald Shelton. And then on the Gaines family came in 1852.
Is that on your mother's side of the family?
They are both on my father's side of the
Oh,
family.
father's side, okay.
I don't have a lot of history. I don't have it written down of my mother's side of the family. I do have a picture of her grandmother, which would be my great-grandmother, on a horse at 100, when she was 100 years old. She lived to be 102, I think, and she saw both of my children born, which is 5 generations in each direction at that time. And
Wow.
on the Gaines side, Willis Gaines and his wife Louisa Crowley Gaines came in 1852. Her father came later. He came around the Horn, came up through what is now California, and came to Oregon that way. He is buried within a mile of the Providence Cemetery. So that's where I come with 7 generations, including him, to have lived in Oregon, although 2 generations of them weren't born here. They came in covered wagons.
So the Gaines, do the Gaines spellings for him.
Gaines is Gaines,
Okay.
and it's misspelled on Willis Gaines's tombstone. I don't know why they accepted
no.
it, but it left the last E out.
And
Sometimes they do that.
spell his wife's name, because that's another misspelled one in
Willis-
records and stuff.
Willis Gaines's wife was Louisa, Louise, Louesa, Louisa is what it looks like.
Okay.
Crowley, and her father was Samuel Crowley, born in 1791, and he is the oldest of my family to be buried in Oregon.
Oh, wow.
So did they, when they came here, did they have any DLCs, like in Scioto area, or?
Yes,
Mhm.
Samuel Gaines Senior, or whatever number he was, he wasn't the first Sam Gaines, but he, or Sam Crowley, excuse me, he wasn't the first Sam Crowley. He had a son, Sam Crowley, that did take a donation land claim next to his brother-in-law, Willis Gaines, who also took a donation land claim. Each of them got 320 acres for themselves and 320 acres for a wife. Sam Crowley didn't have a wife, so he only got the 320, which has been cut down to 160 now, I believe. I'm still good friends with the people that own that place, and I've had the pleasure of going over there. This woman has draft animals, draft horses. I have got to go over there and plow the same ground that my great-great-great-grandfather would have plowed with a horse.
Oh, wow.
That's great.
And you plowed with the horse.
I plowed with a horse, but in the same place.
And how do you spell Willis?
Willis.
And Crowley is Crowley.
Yes.
Okay.
And both Sam Crowley, who was the son of Sam Crowley, and his brother George Washington Crowley came all the way out here in covered wagons, and they didn't like it. They turned around and went back, sold their land to their brother-in-law Willis Gaines, which made him quite a large landholder at that time. And then they went back to Missouri. So Willis Gaines' son, John Wesley Gaines, who is my great-great-grandfather in one direction, ended up with a lot of land. So he had 9 children that lived old enough to get married. One of them having died at 2 years old. Each one of his children, he gave a farm with a team and a wagon for a wedding present.
Oh, wow.
So they weren't all the same size, usually 170, 175, could be 160 or 180 acres. And I still have family living on part of that land that was the original donation land claim of Willis Gaines, handed down to John Wesley, and then he passed it on to my great-grandmother, who was Ina Gaines, and she had a couple more married names, but Linda reminded me this morning of one of the facts that is a little bit interesting, that when Oregon had a centennial celebration, they had a big centennial center at the Multnomah County Fairgrounds, which was Jansen Beach, and it's all gone now. But my great uncle paid my way to go to that and push my great grandmother in a wheelchair around the Centennial Exposition to see all of the covered wagon history that she knew from firsthand, listening to her parents who had walked all the way out here. Both of her parents walked. People think everybody rode in a covered wagon. Unless you were very pregnant or very sick, you didn't ride in a covered wagon, or tiny kids could get in for a while and ride. All their belongings for the rest of their life were in that wagon. Everybody walked out here.
Except for the person driving the wagon, basically.
Only if it was a horse-drawn wagon or a mule-drawn wagon. If it was ox-drawn, which most of them were, ox driving, you don't sit on the wagon. You walk alongside with an ox goad and poke the ox with a stick, keep them going. So in that case, which most of them were ox-drawn wagons, everybody walked.
Wow, I did not know that. That's a great deal of history. And I should say, before I forget, you're going to tell me way more than I will ever be able to put in.
Yeah.
I will try to cherry pick some good things. The other thing that we have started doing with the newspaper is I'm actually starting to post some audio online.
I was just going to ask.
So if you guys are okay with that, I'll probably post this interview online too.
That would be okay.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
thinking about a way that he might end up with a copy, I don't know, thumb drive or disc, so that his voice doing his history is handed on to
Yeah.
family.
If I had a decent video camera, I would video you, but
Yeah.
I don't. Actually, my video functions on this phone are actually quite good, but I don't have the proper tripod set up.
Yeah.
I've tried hand holding and it kind of bounces the whole time. So,
Well, we haven't even come close to the fact that the picnic parade, the Brownsville Pioneer Picnic, I will be driving, and I have been for over 20 years, driving a team of mules. Well, mules just barely 20 years, but either their parents, I drove horses before I drove mules. And we have been in the Brownsville parade for over 20 years.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit more about you, because you mentioned going on wagon trains. I'm sorry if I'm saying the
Yes.
terminology wrong. Okay, so wagon trains. And what does that mean in this day and age? What's that like?
I've been on several wagon train reenactments, and I would guess between 20 and 30 wagon train reenactments where we take animals, horses and mules, never oxen because oxen can't keep up with horses and mules, and the only place you see them mixed in the same wagon train is on television. You get a police escort through town, and the horses and mules go through with the police escort, and the oxen are left behind to fend for themselves.
Is there that many oxen out here to this day?
There are some, very few around here.
Yeah, you don't see them.
Right, not so many.
The last ones I remember seeing were at Philip Foster Farm. My friend Elwin Shibley had them, and I started to raise oxen or tried to go in that direction. I got a Texas Longhorn heifer, raised her, and I got artificial insemination semen from a vet from a supplier that was also a speckled longhorn that I was going to use to breed mine, and it didn't take the first time, and the neighbor's Hereford bull came over, and I ended up with a Hereford-looking offspring, so that shot down my oxen raising for another year. During that time, my friend Elwin told me that his oxen are so destructive that he wouldn't recommend it to anyone. They accidentally, and I can attest to that too, they accidentally can hook a horn in a fence and take out 200 feet of fence before they can shake it loose.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, gosh.
So then all the rest of the animals are gone. I came home many, many nights and went chasing all my sheep and cattle because a longhorn accidentally hooked the fence. They don't do it to be destructive, but those horns are just in the way. They knock the gutters off the barn, they knock the downspouts off the gutters.
Sounds like they're pretty clumsy.
So is that how you get an oxen? They're crossbred with a longhorn?
An oxen can be any breed of cattle. Usually it's a castrated male over 3 years old, which is a steer, until you put him to work, and then he's an ox. Once he's working cattle, he's an ox and not a steer. Well, he's still a steer, but he also becomes an ox. An ox is a beast of burden. A steer is not necessarily.
I never did understand why they're, where did they go to? I thought maybe they were extinct or something. I
Not
just,
so many people are
no.
undertaking the training and driving anymore.
No.
It's really,
Very, very few.
yeah.
And most of them are east. I hate to say it, but in New York is a large part of the oxen. It just doesn't seem to me like New York is where oxen should be from, but that.
They need to be out west, right?
Yeah. Well, I used to tell people too, when I was in Vietnam, I was on the first ship to respond when they fired on the Maddox and Turner Joy. We normally traveled with 4 destroyers escorting my aircraft carrier that I was on. When we went that time, we had 16 destroyers around us, which I would always say is just as safe as being in New York City. And then somebody proved that wasn't very safe either.
You were safer on the ship, probably. So the wagon trains that you would do.
Well, the wagon trains that I did are reenactments, and a lot of it is on paved roads. Most of it would be on paved roads. A few places we've had people cut their fences or open gates and let us go on the actual trail where the ruts are still visible in some cases. And very few ruts left visible today. Some are up in the lava up here in Oregon. There are ruts visible down around Myrtle Creek. That's the closest town to where I saw ruts. I've been on the Applegate Trail reenactment, which was 700 miles long from the Black Rock Desert in Nevada to Rickreall, Oregon.
You did the whole 700?
I did all but the first 2 days of it. They were still in the Black Rock Desert when I got there, but I got a mountain man outfit, clothing, and a backpack, and I had somebody take me out into the desert country where they were coming up into California. They came just across the point of California. I had him let me loose out there with a backpack on, and he was a photographer going to photograph the wagon train anyway. So he went on in, and then I came walking up out of the desert with a backpack and asked if I could join the wagon train. And the wagon master was writing a book, and he has that in there about that he couldn't believe this guy come walking up out of the desert wanting to join his wagon train, where there shouldn't have been people.
And so you said for that one, they had already gone for a couple of days before
They
you
started
joined.
2 days before I got there.
How far would they go in a day? Roughly.
Roughly 15 miles. Some days 7 miles, depends on the terrain.
Right.
If it was a really steep, hilly country, 7 or 8 miles a day. If it was flat ground, 15, 18, maybe even 20. I've gone 21 miles in a day with my team, but I have a more modern wagon, and my team has been born and raised to do just this. I started training them when they were 20 minutes old and still wet. I put collars on them, I put pieces of harness on it so it jingled and jangled, so they know everything. That's all they've known all their life. And if I'm brushing them, I go back and forth under their belly to get to the other side, so that if a 3-year-old runs out there to get candy in a parade, I've already been there today. They aren't spooked by anything like that.
That's great. That's great.
They're used to being in parades with Harleys going behind them or in front of them, fire trucks, police cars, fire trucks with sirens, doing everything. They have about 5 different sirens they can flip it to, and they play with that in a parade where it has a wail and then a whoop, whoop, whoop. And then in one of the parades in Scio, a real fire happened while we were in the parade. The fire truck went out around me and cut right back in front of the mules within 2 feet of the near mule, screaming a siren, and they didn't even flinch. It's just a fire truck.
That's amazing.
Wow. Very well
With
trained.
your Civil War enactment folks, they were close to cannons getting
Right.
fired. And
At every place where we were reenacting wagon trains and mountain man rendezvous, you have Civil War reenactors firing off cannons, and my animals have been around cannon fire and black powder rifles that the mountain men would walk in a parade alongside of me, driving the mules, and as fast as they can reload with powder cap and ball and blast it again, or they leave the ball out in a parade. They just put powder and cap and then blow it. And there'd be 12 or 15 of them reloading and bang, 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 bang. And the mules are walking right alongside them. They're not used, or they're not unused to gunfire. You could easily hunt off of them, but I never have.
So I have a question. How did you learn about training mules? Who taught you about that? Did you learn it on your own? Did you figure it out the hard way, or?
Most of it I learned on my own, and I read books about it from people that had done it, and people that had trained horses. There isn't that much difference between training a mule and training a horse. They say mules are more stubborn. I think mules are only as stubborn as the person that trained them. As long as you let them think that they thought of it, it's much like being married. They'll do everything you want as long as they think they thought of it. And you can't force them. If you force them, you're wasting your time. I just had an example yesterday of trying to force the donkey, which is a wild burro that I have. You don't. You just give up and go somewhere else, and when she's ready to do it, she'll do it.
So, do you remember either how old you were, or about how, like, what year it was, or how long ago it was that you first started working with mules?
Well, you're early driving with Roscoe.
Oh, that's right too. Yeah, I forgot about. I used to go to family reunions where I had one old cousin, which was actually my grandmother's first cousin, who always either rode horses down to the family reunion and gave us rides on horses, or for several years we had the family reunion in his yard, so the horses were right there, and we would ride horses around circles through the barn and back out of the barn around one end of it.
And about how old were you at the time?
I was 7, 8, 9 then, when I was just riding around on horses. And then as I got a little older, he would bring a wagon down once we moved approximately a mile from his house onto a place down by the creek.
Another family property.
Another family property, yeah. He would come down with a horse and wagon and give wagon rides more people at a time than just behind him on the saddle. And in both cases, he said, well, you've done this long enough, why don't you just take over and I'll go talk to the old folks.
And what was his name again?
That was Roscoe Gaines. And
Roscoe.
a lot of people around Linn County know or knew Roscoe Gaines.
And how would you spell Roscoe?
Rosco.
E. He didn't put an E.
C-O-E. All right, yeah, C-O-E.
Roscoe.
That's correct.
Okay.
And even, I can't tell you the number of times that he will mention Roscoe, and everybody's instant reaction is they just laugh and they go, oh, Roscoe. So I'm thinking he was quite the character.
He was quite the character. He was driving his gold Plymouth Duster, we call it a gold duster, and turned into his driveway without signaling. A police officer was following him and pulled over and said, Roscoe, you didn't signal for that turn. Roscoe said, I don't need to signal to turn in here. Everybody knows where I live.
So that was early driving, and then you said much of your other driving was with Doc.
Yeah, I had a friend who was a veterinarian, Dr. Dick Warner, who was in an organization that I belonged to that was Oregon Draft Horse Breeders Association. And I got a lot of my driving experience driving with Dr. Dick. In driving with him on his property, I was driving 2 and 3 and 4 horses at a time, 3 abreast, which that's the only place I ever drove 3 of them side by side instead of 2 when we were disking and plowing and mowing his place. He has passed away the last couple of years ago, but I spent a lot of time practicing with him, learning more and more about driving.
And he would primarily use horses, or did he also use mules?
He had only horses, very large horses. He had the largest horse I've ever seen, which was 20 and a half hands high, Percheron horse. One hand is 4 inches. So what's that make it in feet and inches? I don't know. 15 hands is 5 feet.
Oh, that's
About 7 feet tall is what his biggest horse was.
Wow.
And that's not measured to the top of their head, that's measured to the top of their back.
Right. Right.
My mules are draft horse cross. Their mother was a 2,000-pound Belgian draft horse. So when people think of a mule, they're thinking of a little short 13, 14 hand animal. Mine are 15, 16 hands. I can see over the back of one of them. I can't see over the back on the taller one. So they're very large mules. I also bred for the disposition. I bred them to Belgians because Belgians are a more mild temperament than what the Percherons are. And then I purposely bred for color. I used a gray Mammoth Jack donkey to breed to a very pale blonde Belgian draft mare, so that I got light colored mules that look almost like palominos, but they're mules.
So I have a question. So go back, were you born in Linn County?
I was not born in Linn County. I was born in Multnomah County and raised up there I left home when I was 15, almost 16, and came back to Linn County to my cousin's. My grandmother's half-sister had a dairy, and I came to work on that dairy when I was almost 16.
Was that in Scioto?
That was in Albany,
Oh, in Albany.
right alongside of what's now I-5. In fact, it was I-5 then, but I could go across the street, across I-5 to use the payphone, and I didn't even have to look both ways. There was that little traffic back then.
Those were the good old days.
Yeah, well, you don't see it now. And we
No.
also mowed, while I worked on that dairy, we mowed and raked and baled the area between the two lanes of the freeway, all the way up through there from Jefferson to Albany.
Right. So you probably did not graduate from high school then?
I did not. I went 1 year of high school in Portland before I left, and then I came down here, went 1 year of high school in Albany, at Albany Union High School, which is now West Albany, I guess they call it.
In South Albany, those two.
I helped plumb South Albany.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
was
wow.
after I was a little older. I've been plumbing for 57 years. I've been a journeyman for 50 years, 52 years. Anyway, yeah, South Albany wasn't there then. Then I dropped out of high school, joined the Navy, got a GED, and the GED won't get you everywhere. At that time, when I turned 21, when I got out of the Navy, I could apply to the state of Oregon, and I got a high school diploma from the state of Oregon, because you need a high school diploma to get into a plumbing apprenticeship. You can't do it with a GED, or you couldn't then. Now they have laxed up on the rules. 28 was the maximum you could be to be an apprentice back then, and now I think it's 45. Things keep changing.
So you were fairly young, you were early into the Navy,
Yeah, I was 17 when I joined.
and you were on the first astronaut recovery detail.
Right, we were the astronaut pickup ship for the Pacific. We picked up Gordon Cooper and Walter Schroer. When spacecraft used to go up and come down with a parachute into the ocean instead of landing at an airport like they do today.
You know they're starting to do that again.
Yeah,
Landing in the ocean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep, they've gone back to the parachute pod thing.
yeah.
Yeah, I have pictures of the parachute opening. It was orange and white stripes, so you could see it for a mile in the air. And I have better pictures than a lot of the press photographers, because I was hanging out underneath an elevator like a monkey.
And then do you happen to remember what mission they were coming back from? Because there were several missions where they just kind of went up, orbited a few times, and came down. Was it one of those, or?
It was one of the early ones. It was the Mercury program, which was
Right.
the second space flight program. And we picked up Mercury 8 and Mercury 9.
Okay.
And what did I say, that 22 orbits, I believe, in outer space. We took the antenna, which was a metal, a lot like aluminum. I don't know that it was aluminum, a lightweight, could have been titanium. The antenna, they sent down to the machine shop where I worked on the ship, and we cut 2-inch wide pieces out of a 2-inch pipe, essentially, and engraved them with a pantograph for dignitaries including vice president and all over the United States. They got pieces of that antenna that had been 22 orbits in outer space.
Oh, wow.
And it telescopes down, starting from 2-inch down to 1 7/8, down to by about 1/8 increments. When it got down to 3/4 of an inch, then we weren't cutting them up and giving them away anymore to dignitaries. So we cut pieces off and gave to our wives for rings. And my wife, my ex-wife, still has a ring that's been 22 orbits in outer space.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Mr. Can you move forward again? Goodness. Move the chair forward again. Step up. That works.
So then you went to Vietnam, right?
Yeah, I did. When Vietnam, well, the first I knew of it was when they fired on the Maddox and Turner Joy. LBJ was president. I have a copy of a newspaper front page saying LBJ declares war, which to me dispels all of these people that are saying, oh, it was just an incident, it was just a little skirmish, conflict.
Police
It said
action.
right
It
on
should
the
have
front
never
page.
happened, probably.
When I went there, it was because LBJ said this is war. We were out on Liberty all over Yokosuka, Japan, and got called in. You have so many minutes to get back to your ship. Your ship will deploy without you. And we all got back to the ship. They had shore patrol out hunting anybody from the USS Kearsarge, which was the aircraft carrier I was on.
How do you spell that? Kearsarge.
Kearsarge.
Okay.
And that was also the one that was the astronaut pickup ship. In 63, 62 and 63, I think. We picked up astronauts. 64 we went to Vietnam. 64, 65, and 66. I was on my third trip back, I think, when they bused me to Tokyo and then flew me on a commercial airline back through Alaska to get back to California to be discharged when they could have left me there in the first place. We just left there.
Yeah, military logic isn't always
Oh, dude.
It sure
Logical.
wasn't economical.
Yeah.
But I got to say, I sat down in Alaska. I wasn't there long enough to even drink a hot cup of coffee. I went to the place where you could buy a cup of coffee, and I had to put ice cubes in it because they were calling my plane to leave again already.
wow.
So part of what I liked about his the wagon train stories was by that time he was plumbing and your own boss. So when he'd get wind of a wagon train, he'd just pack up and go.
Yeah, I could go. I had a son that was working with me that could handle almost any job, except he wasn't a licensed plumber, so legally he couldn't do the plumbing. And neither one of us was a licensed electrician, and I would always caution the people, I'm not a licensed electrician, I did not go to school for that, but I've done quite a bit of it, and I haven't burned a house down yet. So we go ahead and hook up things. Mostly appliance installation is what it amounted to.
So he'd hold the fort while Mr. T went out.
Because I was
Wagon
gone 2
training.
months on that long one from on the Applegate Trail. That took 2 months.
Oh, wow. And so you mentioned having buckskins on. So what else? I mean, obviously you're trying to follow the same trail, but what kinds of things happen on a wagon train reenactment? What other activities take place?
Well, we tried to take our wagon trains through to schools, and usually it's the 4th grade classes that are being taught about Oregon history. So mostly 4th graders would come and see the wagon train. Some of them walk along with us. We had several kids walking with us, and I put about 20 of them on a rope to slow the wagon down going down a hill to show them what it was like. I said, you guys are going to be the tree that I would have tied behind my wagon to slow it down going down this steep hill.
And tied it so that the branches went opposite. They're
Right, you
creating
tie
drag.
the top of the tree, or the bottom of the tree to the wagon, so it pulls it backwards.
So the bottom of the tree is facing the wagon, or the top of the tree is facing the wagon?
The bottom, it depends on the tree. If it was very big, then you couldn't put the bottom to there. But usually they tied trees to slow down going down a hill, and I did it with school kids. And I was hired by the Washington County Historical Society to dress up in my buckskins and go to schools and tell about mountain men and trappers and traders. And I probably spoke to 3,000 fourth graders about mountain men, trappers, and traders, and I still run into them. And it's funny that they say, well, you remember me, you came to my class and talked to me about mountain men. Yeah, there were a few more that I talked to also. But they remembered me, and they'd come up to me in a wagon train and say, oh, you were at my class.
That's great.
Well, I'm not even going to be able to get a tenth of this in, but is there anything else that you'd like to share or that you think is important for people to know about you, or history you'd like to share? So,
Well, I've always been interested in Oregon history because I knew that my ancestors were part of it. Most of them came in covered wagons. So I paid attention to that class. The rest of them I wasn't so attentive.
So did they all come out of Missouri, or kind of like the way they migrated?
Yes, some of them were born in further south or further east.
Right.
For instance, Samuel Crowley, who was my fourth great-grandfather, was born in Savannah, Georgia. He was a judge, and he was holding court in Missouri underneath an oak tree, and renamed the town that he was in Savannah, Missouri, after Savannah, Georgia, where he was born. I had ancestors before him in Virginia. My seventh great-grandfather, who was also Samuel Crowley, was the first person killed in the first battle of the Revolutionary War, October 10th, 1774, in Point Pleasant, Virginia. And that is documented. There's a monument there to that effect saying Samuel Crowley was the first person killed by Shawnee Indians, which were in the employ of the Tory government to kill settlers and bring back scalps. They got paid for scalping settlers so that the American settlers, of which wasn't America at that time, it was Raleigh's land, would think that they needed the Tory government for protection, so they wouldn't rebel against them, but they did. They got tired of being pushed around by the British and formed their own country.
mm-hmm.
So did your dad do all this too with the horses? And
No, my
kind
dad,
of
it skipped my dad.
oh, okay.
He was not interested in doing that, and he would often make comments about somebody being one of my cousins, because I would do the genealogy and find this person and that person,
Yep.
and they would come to family reunions, and my dad would say, that's one of Tom's cousins. Yeah, well, it was his cousin too, but he wasn't owning that.
Wasn't so into it. It always seems like there's one person in each family that really is the one that kind of gets into the family history more than the rest of them.
Right, and that,
And you were the one.
yeah, in my generation, and maybe the one before and after also,
But Willetta,
Willetta was in my dad's generation, and Willetta Pence, she was born Willetta Burton, but she married Clyde Pence. she recorded most of what I know that was written. You know, some of it I picked up doing it myself, but she recorded a lot of our family's history, the Gaines family history and the Shelton family history. And she died at 98 years old just a couple of years ago.
What? How do you spell Willetta?
Willetta.
And she would call.
And where?
Yeah, she called me to ask questions. She said, Tommy knows that stuff more than I do. Well, what I know I learned from her, but she forgot that I learned it.
Right.
She would
And
call,
where was she? Where did she live?
In Scioto and around Scioto. Well, she lived in Portland for a long time also, but her place, up until the time she died, and it still is in the family, was part of Willis Gaines's donation land claim.
it's on Oper Road.
Oper Road out of Scioto, off of Fish Hatchery Drive.
But she would call out of the blue and she'd say, Tommy, whose property is this? And she would read over the phone the township section range numbers and he'd go, oh, well, that was so-and-so's, but he sold it to them and then they gave it to their son. And from the township, from those numbers, he'd go, oh yeah, that's
To retain all that history, I am the one in my family that does that, but you gotta keep it reeling through your head to keep it all
Yeah.
straight.
Well,
Right.
occasionally he'll tell people, your family's donation land claims went from where to Lyons? What?
From Scioto lands,
Yes.
all the way up Thomas Creek. And then on Crabtree Creek, from probably 10 miles out of Scioto, at the Larwood, it's Larwood Park now and Larwood Covered Bridge. From that point, as far as you can see in any direction, was my family's land. And Willetta was raised in the house next to the Larwood Covered Bridge, and there's still a rundown part of a mill there that was a water wheel that generated electricity. And my Uncle Art and my Uncle Lee built that water wheel in 1917. Uncle Art threw a chunk of wood in the creek and measured from point A to point B how long it took to get that distance to tell the velocity of the water to know what it would do for a generator. And he generated electricity for their farm, which, like I said, was at Fish Hatchery Drive and Meridian Road. And Meridian is the place where the surveys were laid out from, is why I can tell you from a survey number whose place it was. They had electricity on that farm from 1917 on. Rural electrification didn't come to that area until 1937. So for 20 years, that was the only electric lights besides Salem. Salem had earlier electricity, but people would come over hill and think they took a wrong turn and went to Salem. Because here's this dairy all lit up, the barn's got lights, house got lights. And then at a certain time, Uncle Lee would say, lights out 5 minutes, and go out on the front porch and pull the tripwire, and it raised the water wheel up out of the creek so it wasn't turning all night long.
So do your children have an interest in all this history and the stuff that's gone on?
Not really. They can each one tell you little parts of it that they remember about. My daughter knows more of it than my son. My son once in a while will tell me something that I forgot.
Do they live around here then?
My son lives in a travel trailer on my property. My daughter lives in Junction City. And comes and helps me with electronic gadgetry that I can't figure out.
Yeah, they went to school in Jefferson, and so
Oh,
They went all 12 years to Jefferson.
okay.
with his place in Jefferson now, it's kind of like old home week.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, my ex-wife has been there continuously since we got married in '63. She's still in the house we had built, 3 bedrooms with a 2-car garage, for $14,500.
And she gave it a 50th year birthday party, the house.
Oh. Well, I guess she took care of it then, or has
Yeah.
taken care of it.
Still in
Yeah.
Even though, you let her have it?
She's been a homekeeper, housekeeper, because she kept it through 3 marriages.
Oh.
But it's in good shape. She's done a good job keeping it.
Yeah.
Well, I can say Brownsville holds a very fond spot in this man's heart.
Yeah.
Brownsville is a special place, really.
It
It's unique.
is.
It's
When I was
unique.
Yeah.
looking
Sure.
for a place to buy or rent or lease, I looked all around here, couldn't find anything available at that time, so I settled back in Jefferson again, where I had been 20 years before. And I was able to get a GI loan on it and payments that I could almost afford. For a while, I had to sell something every month to make the payment,
But he does have a lot of stuff. He's got a rust garden, all this horse-drawn stuff that he's not using. Yeah, even that process was interesting because he hadn't used his GI loan benefit yet. So he was kind of infamous among the gang that was helping put the house deal together. And so I've never seen so many people around this huge table for a mortgage signing. And when they got all done, the kids, they were 2 young guys that helped, they said, well, we think when you turn 100, they should just give you your house.
That's not a bad idea.
Sure, yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I thought that sounded fine.
Yeah.
So what, maybe a little more specific, is there anything specific to Brownsville that makes it,
well, the Pioneer Picnic for one thing. My great-great-grandfather, John Wesley Gaines, was one of the pioneers that formed the Pioneer Association before it was called the Pioneer Picnic Association. When was that, 1878?
You're better than me to
Something
list
like
the
that.
dates there. I haven't got it in my head.
It's always been special because I knew it was instrumental in, and it's hard to believe that they came down here for a meeting, which is, 30 miles with horses.
That's right.
Run down here and have a Pioneer meeting and go back up there, maybe stay at somebody's place overnight.
And it's always interested me that the time of year seems like it could have been a hard time of year to get away from the farm, but yet they did.
That's true.
Yeah.
so even back then it was in the summertime?
Yes, in June.
I can remember as a little kid, it was a big deal for my dad to bring us to the Pioneer Picnic.
Yeah. It was a big deal.
I remember I never liked going, and I had been little, 4 or 5 maybe, and I just remember feeling like I was in this forest of women's skirts. So they would have been in, really Pioneer
Dress.
wear. That's right.
That's right.
That's right. And I just would be lost in these skirts until way late into the evening.
Sure. It's amazing, like I said, but the pioneers knew they needed to come together and have because they came so far and they survived it to get this far, so
Yeah.
to be able to,
And I think, the friendships that they would have formed in like 4 and 5 months
oh, sure.
coming over,
Well,
those would have been just so instrumental.
Huge.
And
Lifetime.
keeping in contact
Yeah.
would have been
several
huge.
books say that William Cyrus and Haman Shelton were on the same wagon train together, shared campfires together, became friends, and took donation land claims next to each other so that they could continue to be friends.
Yeah, help each
And-
other.
several generations later, I'm still good friends with descendants of the Cyrus family when I'm a descendant of the Shelton
Sure.
family. And the descendant that I am good friends with of the Cyrus family is living on what was part of Willis Gaines's donation land claim. So it's all interlocked over
I
many
think a lot of
generations.
times intermarried within these families
Yes.
too.
Right,
that-
and
Oh,
that,
sure.
that family
Yeah.
in particular, there were
Yeah,
several generations where Gaines women married Peary boys or the other way around. Gaines men married Peary women. And the Pearys are descended from William Cyrus.
right.
And the cemetery committee that we're working on getting grant money for, it also states that Providence Cemetery got run down in bad repair, and Robert Peary stepped forward and got a crew together to clear all the overgrown brush.
Right, to start making the
Made it
improvements.
better.
Mhm.
And today it's pretty nice and clear.
About how many graves is in that cemetery?
1,300
Oh.
roughly.
That's huge.
It's pretty big, and they have an additional 3 acres undeveloped
New
yet,
ones?
so,
Oh,
yeah,
They can take,
yeah.
And we're working right now on building a columbarium to put cremains in,
right?
and we haven't got it bought. Well, we've agreed to buy it, but we have not got it here yet. We're working also on getting a concrete slab for it to sit on when it gets here. One of our members owns a trucking company here in Brownsville.
Oh.
And he will truck it for us. That's Ram Trucking.
Oh, ramp trucking, oh, really? Good.
He's been president of the Providence Memorial Association for a few years.
Well, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to be going in that direction with this cremation and
Yeah.
so many people don't even take them till they've got them on their mantle or in their closet. And
Right.
then what, after a while? That's what I'm kind of confused at. I know several cousins and relatives that so instead of having their family plot at the cemetery, which my family's totally traditional
Yeah,
in that way, but now my mother, it's hard for her to fathom that these people are just all going to cremation and not worrying about the plot at the cemetery anymore,
Yeah.
and they are lining it up for their kids to take care of.
Yeah.
And who knows what's gonna happen to it.
I'm vacillating myself between do I want to go for all of that coffin burial or do I want to be cremated? And we have several of us already have plots bought.
Right.
And the cemetery committee or board that I'm on has made it so that there's a casket burial already in a grave site. You can add a cremains burial on top of that in a concrete box. It has to be in,
Just one?
just one on
Well,
top of a
actually,
casket. And if
are
there's no
they
casket
allowing-
burial, then you can have 3 cremains in a grave site.
Or gravesite, okay.
Which that ends up being a lot less, and when we get this columbarium built, most of them will cost as much or more than a grave site, but that doesn't include the digging, and
Right, you're
the
not-
concrete liner that you've gotta have around a casket. You can't just put a wooden coffin in the ground
No,
in that cemetery anymore.
right.
As far as the state of Oregon, you don't even need to be in a casket. You can be wrapped in a blanket or
Yeah.
just put in the dirt.
but I think most cemeteries don't wanna deal with the settling that
Yeah, that's right,
happens.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and and thinking again about what makes Brownsville so special, I think for me there's this sense that the whole community is just so invested in maintaining the history that's here
That's right.
and just friendly.
Look at the
Yeah.
buildings on Main Street.
Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah, I wish
And they've
Jefferson
retained
would
that,
have.
it hasn't, they aren't letting it go with the modern times totally, trying to retain, you know, and that's
Yeah.
why people come here and love it.
Yeah,
Anybody that's a history buff or into that kind of thing,
yeah.
you just go, wow, these people that came here, came across the Oregon Trail, and, you know, they're
Yeah.
just,
Well, it's kind of like there's a sense of how much this costs, how valuable it is.
oh, yeah, yeah.
For a lot of years, they used a poster or a picture of my wagon with one mule and one horse pulling it. So I can tell you about when that was, when I had one mule old enough to drive with her mother in front of the Moyer house. And they used it for come to Brownsville literature. And they still have it today on
On stuff, yeah.
posters. That
For the
picture.
longest time, at the pavilion where the food
Oh.
part would be, the menu was on that or very near that.
Oh,
picture.
really?
Yeah,
Well, that just brings the pioneer flair back, I think.
yeah.
It's great.
Well, I'm glad to be part of it.
Well, we're glad to have you a part of it. And you've been so helpful through the years too, of giving descendants rides or anybody that wanted to ride through the park. And there's probably been many people go, I remember riding with him. He gave me a ride.
You know, it's so,
Yeah.
that is for me almost the most fun
I
is,
run into them all over the
Yeah.
Putting a
state.
smile on people's faces, yeah,
I run into
absolutely.
people that come up and shake my hand and say, I rode on your wagon in Brownsville.
Yes,
you know, maybe it was pre-pandemic. The Hands-on History Day has become so popular, and
Yeah.
that's, for me, that's one of those big highlights. But one of those years just before the pandemic, there was a man near the museum all by himself, and he stood back and he watched us do load after load after load of people. And at the end of the day, when we should have been done and we were hot and dog tired, he came and asked if he could pet the mules. And then I could see that he shook so much. He had Parkinson's. And
good. Just
when
made
his-
his day for,
when his hands touched those mules, you could just see him melt into them, and he didn't shake. And he petted for the longest time, and he said, "I thank you so much. I miss my horses."
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it just made his day, sitting there watching you guys.
It did, and for me to watch him just,
Yeah, it just
you know,
touches
something
you.
about that touch that let him not tremor.
Right,
Oh,
Now,
it was
I've had
huge.
dozens of people say, this is the first time I ever touched a horse. And I
Yes.
don't correct them all and say that's a mule, but I let them pet their horse.
sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and you can definitely tell that for a lot of people, it's therapy.
Yeah, oh
It's
yeah.
therapy.
She likes to tell a story about we were doing a 100-year birthday party for an old woman.
Yep, that's one of my other favorites.
This woman was 100 years old. She didn't know we were going to be there. Her family
Yeah, it was
had
a-
hired us to come and give rides at her 100-year birthday. And she came over when I was hitching the mules up. I'd already harnessed at home and brought them already harnessed. Drove them to the wagon, hooking them up.
Oh, yeah, we
and-
weren't even unloaded before she was coming over.
She was over there talking and wanting to pet him, and she was really surprised. And I said, well, I had a cousin that was 93 when she was up there on one of them with me, riding. And she said, well, if somebody boosts me up, I could get up there too. So I put my hands down like a stirrup, and she jumped up there, 100 years old, sat on the back of that mule, and then she leaned forward and just gave it a big hug.
Just ran her hands down the shoulders.
And while she was hugging it, Linda said you could see 90 years just go away.
Oh, that was incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know, that's the payoff for
Yeah.
a lot of
a lot of people, but you know, that's
Oh,
probably,
and for us.
well, yeah, for you
Yeah.
too. But that's, you know, those people are getting up here and it's, you know, that generation is even Pioneer Picnic, you know, in my folks' era, it was the getting together with the Brownsville High School class reunion down there, and all of them congregate in that pavilion would just be full of those people,
Yes.
and now they're not there.
Yeah,
That pavilion is half empty, you know,
yeah,
and it's a struggle now for the picnic association now. First of all, people go, it's just not the same. It's not like it used to be. First of all, we need to get the carnival back.
Mhm.
Well, you know, we have tried being on the board there to try to do that, but you know, they just those rides and stuff. It's just getting impossible. They will not come to a little town. First of all, they can't make enough
I'll
money,
bet,
and
yeah.
then it's getting so expensive to
Yes.
do. You know,
Nobody wants to pay the price to
No.
ride on the thing anyway.
no,
Yeah.
we found an outfit that had I said, even if we could just get a few rides, you know, we just thought that would be simple, but they found a company, I forget where, I think in Portland. And just even bring a few was more money than what we have, and then
Yeah.
in order to make it pay for itself, it just, it'd be too spendy, you know?
Mhm.
And I don't know what it is now that's gonna be a drawing point to get people, you know, a lot of people go, I'm not even gonna bother coming down to the park anymore. They may show up for the parade. I think the Grand Parade probably is the highlight anymore, because
Yeah,
far as down in the park, I mean, especially if it rains now or whatever, it's just a wash.
yes,
It's just,
Yep.
yeah,
and they're, you know, having a hard time. The traditional chicken dinner is not the same. I mean, all that tradition is not the same. And for people to try to boost it up and try to get people excited about being down there again, are just, I don't know if it will never probably be what it used to be.
yeah. It's interesting to me though that the number of kids who, you know, if they're kind of reluctant at first, they'll get on, especially the first time on the wagon. And I think as an onlooker, it seems too boring to them. And they get on it and you're sitting up and you're going at a pace that's faster than a walk but not running, and you can see and you get that rhythm
Yep.
of the, and you know,
And that's if they've experienced that with you, that is the highlight for sure.
yeah, and the number of times that they're surprised by that, it's like, oh, and some of them just go, oh,
This is pretty cool.
yeah, like it's
Well,
this
here-
revelation.
At my family reunion, the same thing, that there's generations. I'm now starting on the 4th generation of kids that have ridden on that wagon.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
And they come back every year to
Sure.
ride on the wagon
That's
more than to
tradition.
see their cousins.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's good, because there's a lot of families that don't carry that tradition on. You know, it's kind of
Yeah.
withered. And
Yeah,
this generation coming up, they don't have the ambition to put the reunion together, to pull everybody together.
right, I think,
Well, I was fortunate that my veterinarian wanted to do a family reunion and have me come and give rides at her family reunion.
yes, well, that was really fun.
Yeah, and it paid my vet bills for quite a while. But
That was good.
I usually don't make
everybody.
anything. Quite often it costs me far more than what I make going to something. But
Oh, I'm
she
sure.
took it
Well,
off my
you
vet
just
bill for
don't
quite a
add,
while.
you just don't,
And she's retired and sold her veterinary business, but she works on my cats on her countertop and on her lace.
kids
She
are
rolls
cute,
back
yes,
a
oh
lace
my gosh.
tablecloth on a fancy dining room set and works on my cats and dogs.
That's great.
Yeah, so giving the rides does pay off in more ways than one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well,
And you're just an asset to Brownsville being here, for Carrie to be back and all these events. You know, you truly bring the ambience to the town.
this is part of that payoff.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah,
That is
and
really
these
cool.
are friends, they're not related, but
Oh, that
Yeah.
is so cool.
it's
What
one,
is that
it's another of my favorites with the two girls that are
Yeah.
riding.
one? Oh, man.
And
that's
this is on family property again where that reunion happens.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can put 4 kids on each mule and still drive them as long as they keep their feet off the line so I can have some control.
Yeah,
And I
we can
don't
load
really
it
need-
properly, or,
If I don't move those lines at all, I can voice command over G, overhaul, come around G. They go where I ask them to go because they've done this their whole life.
it looks like a lot of mind reading, actually, because they are so in sync.
If we've
That's
done this
amazing.
route already today, they'll turn on the same corner. They know where we're going.
That's so cool.
And that's why you chose to drive your wagon and team. Him being the Grand Marshal, he didn't want to be put in the and let somebody else drive him around. But because his mules know where to take him.
Yep.
Well, and they're partly grand marshals too.
They're Grand Marshals too. They're with him. That's absolutely true. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it wouldn't be much of a show without them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, we've hauled a lot of Grand Marshal families.
Yes,
over
you
the
have.
years.
And descendants and
Yeah.
Mhm.
so, yeah. And so I hope you could get some relatives or some of your family to ride with you.
Oh, are you thinking that you'll put other special folks?
Well, no, I
Yeah,
asked him if he wanted to put some of his family with
Oh,
him.
okay.
So that comes first priority, but
Okay,
if
good.
you have, but, Chafin Farms will be there with a wagon to haul the descendants. I'm hoping to get a bunch of them,
Yeah, good.
so.
So the Miss Oregon Pioneer,
Oh, yeah.
is she gonna be in your wagon then, or do we know?
Oh, yeah, I have invited Miss Pioneer Oregon to ride in the wagon.
Right. They're all coming again this year. I thought they were coming back.
I think they're coming. I
Yeah, the
haven't
sons and
heard
daughters
lately
of
that
the-
they were or weren't.
Sons and Daughters of
Oh,
Oregon
We're
Pioneers.
pioneers, yeah.
They've
I
also
love that
invited
too.
me to take Miss Pioneer Oregon in the Rose Festival parade this
Oh,
year.
wow.
So
Oh,
the
that's
Mules and
big.
Wagon will be in the Rose Festival.
Oh, and
That's
Oh, wow.
interesting too.
it is, yeah. And then we just learned that Jefferson is going to do a Heroes Parade. I don't know if
Oh, I
this
saw
is-
that on Facebook,
Native
yeah.
American heroes that were in World War II. They have all the code readers or code talkers that used to speak Indian, and they couldn't break down the code because the enemy
Not a
didn't know
written
the Indian
language,
language.
yeah.
So I'm going to haul that Grand Marshal in the Jefferson Parade, which is Bill Stam, Chief Blue Eyes.
Oh. Like they're booking you up for the summer, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's fun.
Yeah,
That's what I do for entertainment.
that's right, that's great.
And this year he's had a young, energetic mountain man wannabe
Oh,
who's worked with a couple of mule teamsters for 6 or 7 years. And they said, I think we told you all the mountain man stuff we can. You need to meet this other guy. So he's starting to come along and help a little bit. What a blessing.
well, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
We
helped me
walk
last,
along with you or ride along, whatever, be part of.
Yeah.
That's
last week.
good.
He helped me harness and take the harness off and put
Oh.
away.
Well, that's good,
Did a
that's
little
helpful.
drive and
Yeah. And he's called back and said, when can we do this again?
Oh, good.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's,
all right.
that's swell.
Good, yeah. Linda gets a little tired of it.
Oh, it's like I'm not as young as I used to be. And by the time you slept and packed and driven and set up
Oh, yeah, you get tired.
campsite and high line and you're,
Yeah,
And I cut the
There's a
top
lot
off
of
the
work.
front
it
of
is.
my horse trailer or my stock trailer. I cut the front 10 feet off the roof and jacked it up 1 foot and put plexiglass windows all the way around like a Vista Cruiser, so I can lay up there in bed and look out in the park in Brownsville and see where the people are, who's petting the mules or who's asking if they can pet, or if there's a
It's
dog
totally-
bothering them.
it's totally
gosh.
typical to hear a little bit of chattering and wake up and some kids or people have come to pet the mules on the high line.
It makes a weird looking trailer, but it works for
It
me.
works, yeah.
Yeah.